In early 2026, the world watched in disbelief and anticipation as the United States launched Operation Liberty's Dawn, a bold and controversial move that would soon dominate headlines across every continent. In a stunning turn of events, U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, ending his years-long grip on power and sending shockwaves through the international community. The White House justified the intervention as a necessary step to restore democracy and stabilize a nation on the brink of collapse. Yet this unprecedented action immediately sparked fierce debate among world leaders, analysts, and citizens alike, raising questions about sovereignty and the future of global order. In the aftermath, a pro-US interim government was swiftly installed in Caracas, promising reforms and new elections, but facing skepticism both at home and abroad. Global oil markets responded with intense volatility as investors scrambled to assess the impact on energy supplies and prices, highlighting Venezuela's crucial role in the world's energy landscape. For years, the U.S. had refused to recognize Maduro's regime, relying on sanctions and diplomatic pressure. But this direct military intervention marked a dramatic escalation, setting a new precedent for American foreign policy and military engagement. Now, as world leaders gather at emergency summits and urgent meetings, the pressing question on everyone's mind is, what comes next? The global balance of power appears more fragile than ever. Attention is rapidly shifting from Latin America to the Indo-Pacific, with Taiwan emerging as the next potential flashpoint in this new era of uncertainty. Some experts argue that the U.S. action in Venezuela will serve as a warning to China, deterring any aggressive moves toward Taiwan. Others, however, worry it could provoke Beijing to accelerate its own plans, increasing the risk of conflict. The Chinese government's response remains closely guarded, but tensions are clearly rising, with diplomatic channels buzzing and military posturing intensifying. At the heart of these power struggles lie two critical resources: Venezuelan oil and Taiwanese semiconductors, both essential to the functioning of the global economy and the ambitions of major powers. As alliances are tested and new partnerships form, this story explores how these seismic events are reshaping international relationships and the delicate balance of power that has defined the modern era. The world now stands at the threshold of a new, uncertain era in international relations, one where the rules are being rewritten and the future remains more unpredictable than ever before. Venezuela, once one of the wealthiest countries in South America thanks to its vast oil reserves, stood as a symbol of prosperity and promise. Its bustling cities and thriving oil industry drew admiration from around the world, and for decades, oil revenues fueled ambitious social programs and infrastructure projects. But in recent years, the nation has faced a devastating economic collapse and a mass exodus of its people under the leadership of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. Once busy supermarkets now stand empty, and millions of Venezuelans have fled their homeland in search of food, medicine, and safety. Hyperinflation has rendered the bolivar nearly worthless, while chronic shortages of basic goods and medicine have created a humanitarian crisis. The refugee crisis has spilled across borders, straining neighboring countries and drawing international concern. Throughout this turmoil, the government has consistently blamed U.S. sanctions for the nation's woes, insisting that foreign interference is the root cause of Venezuela's suffering. However, international observers and critics point instead to years of corruption, economic mismanagement, and authoritarian rule as the true culprits behind Venezuela's decline. Maduro's regime has systematically dismantled democratic institutions, jailed political opponents, and faced serious accusations of drug trafficking and human rights abuses. Despite mounting international sanctions and diplomatic pressure, Maduro has managed to hold on to power, relying on the loyalty of the military and crucial support from foreign allies like China, Russia, and Cuba. Over time, U.S. policy shifted from imposing sanctions to considering direct intervention, after years of failed attempts to oust Maduro and restore democracy. The military's tight control over vital sectors like oil and infrastructure kept them loyal to the regime, while foreign backing provided the resources needed to keep Maduro's government afloat. By late 2025, the hawks in Washington prevailed, arguing that the risks of inaction now outweighed those of intervention, and that decisive action was necessary to address the crisis. The stage was set for a dramatic U.S. move, as the world watched Venezuela stand at a historic crossroads, its future hanging in the balance. On January 2, 2026, U.S. Special Forces launched a rapid strike on Caracas, targeting Maduro and his inner circle. Key government sites fell within hours. Resistance collapsed quickly. The White House framed the operation as a humanitarian mission to end a narco-state and restore democracy. Crowds celebrated in some neighborhoods, while others protested the foreign intervention. An interim government was sworn in within 48 hours, promising elections and aid. Oil contracts with China and Russia were put under review. Maduro was captured and extradited to the U.S. on charges of drug trafficking and corruption. The world was left to wonder, is this a one-off or the start of a new U.S. interventionist era? The U.S. intervention in Venezuela drew fierce condemnation from China and Russia, who called it a violation of international law. Both demanded a UN Security Council emergency session and the withdrawal of U.S. forces. Latin America's response was split. Colombia and Brazil offered cautious support, while Mexico and Argentina condemned the breach of sovereignty. The UN and Europe urged restraint and a rapid return to democracy, but stopped short of endorsing the U.S. action. The UK backed the intervention, deepening divisions within the West. This episode exposed fundamental disagreements about the rules of the international order. For some, the U.S. acted to end a criminal regime. For others, it set a dangerous precedent of unilateral force. The global power struggle has only intensified. At first glance, Venezuela and Taiwan seem worlds apart. One is a crisis-ridden oil state in South America, the other a thriving democracy and tech powerhouse in East Asia. Their histories, cultures, and economies could hardly be more different, and yet recent events have drawn unexpected parallels between their fates. The U.S. intervention in Venezuela has sparked anxious comparisons with Taiwan's tense standoff with China, raising questions about how superpowers act when their interests are at stake. Both Venezuela and Taiwan face relentless pressure from powerful neighbors, one from the United States, the other from China, and both grapple with questions of political legitimacy and sovereignty. The U.S. called Maduro's presidency illegitimate, just as China repeatedly calls Taiwan's government illegitimate, using similar language to justify their positions on the world stage. But there's a crucial difference. Venezuela's deep economic and humanitarian crisis was used to justify outside intervention, while Taiwan remained stable, prosperous, and a model of resilience in the region. The U.S. acted in its own backyard, where it has long-standing influence. In contrast, any Chinese move on Taiwan would mean confronting not just Taiwan, but also U.S. treaty allies in East Asia, raising the stakes dramatically. Still, the psychological impact of these interventions is real. Superpowers may now feel emboldened to use force or coercion whenever they believe their core interests are threatened, regardless of international norms. For Taiwan, the fear is palpable. That China could one day use the U.S. playbook in Venezuela as a blueprint to justify its own intervention, claiming to restore order or legitimacy. The events in Caracas have forced a serious reevaluation of risk, deterrence, and the fragile balance of power in the Taiwan Strait, making the stakes higher than ever before. The world is watching closely, waiting to see what the next move will be, and whether history will repeat itself or take a different path this time. China's leaders are split. Does the U.S. action in Venezuela deter or provoke? Some see it as proof of U.S. resolve, making Beijing more cautious about Taiwan. Others view it as American aggression, pushing China to act before the U.S. can intervene elsewhere. President Xi, under pressure to appear strong, may feel compelled to respond. If China doubts U.S. commitment, it could test Washington with smaller moves, like seizing outlying islands. The U.S. may have made the Taiwan Strait even more volatile and unpredictable. China's next steps will depend on its assessment of U.S. resolve and its own readiness. The risk of miscalculation has never been higher. At the heart of these crises are vital resources: Venezuelan oil and Taiwanese microchips. Venezuela's oil reserves have long influenced global energy markets. The U.S. hopes to stabilize supply with a friendly government. China, a major creditor, faces a setback as its energy investments are threatened. Taiwan, meanwhile, is the world's semiconductor powerhouse. Its chips power everything from phones to missiles. If China controlled Taiwan, it would dominate a critical choke point in the global tech supply chain. The Silicon Shield makes Taiwan's economic value a deterrent, but also a target. A conflict over Taiwan would trigger a global recession, far worse than any oil shock. While the world can find new oil sources, there's no substitute for Taiwan's advanced chips. The stakes are economic as much as strategic. The US move in Venezuela is redrawing global alliances and shaking markets. Washington is reasserting dominance in Latin America, but risks alienating partners wary of interventionism. Europe is divided. UK supports the US, but France and Germany are uneasy, threatening NATO unity. Some countries may seek more independent foreign policies, while others draw closer to the US for security. Energy markets spiked on uncertainty, but a pro-US Venezuela could boost oil supply and lower prices long-term. This would hurt exporters like Russia and Saudi Arabia, shifting the global energy map. Middle powers are rethinking their security, as unilateral action seems to trump international law. Expect a surge in military spending and new regional alliances. The world is fragmenting, making cooperation on global challenges harder. The era of stable alliances is over. The US capture of Maduro marks a turning point in global politics. It signals a more assertive US foreign policy and exposes deep international divisions. The world wonders if this is a one-off or a new doctrine, especially with Taiwan in the crosshairs. The risk US actions could deter or provoke China, raising the stakes for a direct superpower clash. Taiwan's security now hinges on its economic value, military readiness, and unpredictable US-China strategies. The fight for resources, oil and microchips, is reshaping alliances and markets. We're entering a chaotic, multipolar era where force may trump diplomacy. The next years will test the resilience of the international system, and the world must brace for heightened tension and uncertainty.